Hey guys, welcome to episode 80 of Axioms on Trial. Can't believe it's been 80 episodes already. I'm just by myself tonight, but hopefully by tomorrow, J. Mike will join us again. We have some planned content. I want to do a review next time of a video that I saw some Muslims post about LGBTQ issues, and it really angered me, so I definitely want to review that really soon. Perhaps we'll also finish the second part of the video that Mike and I were reviewing last time. Area Wither, a pessimistic idealism. I might actually address some of what you sent me, pessimistic idealism. We'll see where this goes. Probably going to be a shorter show, but because I'm by myself. But first of all, can you guys hear me okay? And also, just a little bit of news. By tomorrow, I'll finally have my new computer. So all I got to do is go pick it up. So once I have that, hopefully I won't be dealing with the issues that I've been dealing with. It feels like this computer is like on its last legs. It freezes every time that I do a show, and I have to jump on my phone. So if that happens again, I have my phone ready to go in there. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comment section. In the meantime, I want to address some questions that were left on some of the videos and respond to some of those. And then, pessimistic idealism, I probably won't get to address everything you sent me, especially because I'm on my own and I haven't had as much time to focus on that stuff as I would like, because I've been busy trying to edit my thesis and everything. But I did take a look at some of it, and I do have some feedback. So I'll see if I can get to that this episode, at least a little bit. But the one comment that I wanted to address was someone by the name of Alec, who always leaves very insightful comments on the videos, and I appreciate his contribution. Some of what he left. So he says, this is in relation to the conversation that I had with J. Mike on moral realism. And he writes, cease to know your moral system confuses me a bit. You say morality is about fostering well-being, and thus there are objective facts about how to be moral. Fine, that's just utilitarianism. But when presented with the thought experiment of having to harm someone in order to save the rest of humanity, you claim that it would be immoral to do so. This is clearly some sort of deontology. I've never seen anyone successfully both a utilitarian and a deontologist. So I want to kind of clear up some of that. I'm not strictly a utilitarianist, because I think I think I'm more of a rule utilitarianism than a strict utilitarianist, because it's not just about what is useful. Here's an example. Like, under a strict utilitarian perspective, you would have to support the idea that if one person could have their organs taken out to save 5 people, that would be the moral action to take. That seems, and a lot of criticisms of utilitarianism tend to kind of point to kind of this instinct we have of that example as, no, like that would be wrong to just go against somebody's will and vivisect them to save other people, even if the moral arithmetics might suggest otherwise. What I would say was that in light of that kind of situation, the kind of society where any of us would be in danger of being vivisected, even if ultimately numbers-wise it sounds like it doesn't add up, it would be a worse society to live in if all of us were kind of subject to that possibility. So it's still about consequences in that context. It's just that it's a little bit counterintuitive where the consequences lie. Um, I'm also not a strict utilitarian or consequentialist in the sense that I think intentions still matter. So a person who's, kicking a cat because it likes, he enjoys doing harm, and a person who kicks a cat to try to get out of the way of an oncoming car, even though in both situations the consequence was that the cat was saved, it's a different kind of judgment that we make of that person. I don't think that my perspective is a deontological one. What I'm saying is that if harming well-being is wrong or is immoral, it's always going to be immoral if I'm a moral realist. So if to save humanity, I have to hurt somebody, it's not suddenly going to make that action moral, but it is still going to be justified given kind of the bigger picture. So I would still argue that killing somebody to save many in certain instances, even if not as a rule used by society, will still be something that will be justified. But what I'm arguing for is a spectrum of behavior, and so I can still call something immoral, but less immoral than some other alternatives. So that, I hope that kind of clears it up a little bit. I'm not trying to be both at once. I'm saying that there is a spectrum of behavior that will lead to well-being and a spectrum of behavior that will lead to suffering. And, sometimes, you're going to be justified in certain kinds of harm in the larger context of the conversation, but you wouldn't be tempted to call that moral, just less immoral than something else. I hope that makes sense. Now, another comment that he left that was interesting to me. He writes, I think that realism should be distanced from semantics. Michael Devitt says, a metaphysical doctrine like realism is about the nature of reality in general, about what there is and what it is like. It is about the largely inanimate, impersonal world. Any semantic doctrine has a place in our theory of only a small part of that reality, our theory of people and their language. So he's saying realism is about stuff, not language. If you have a correspondence theory of truth, then that ties to your semantics, to your metaphysics in a clear way. But your metaphysics don't need to be so tight. I'm not saying that I have a correspondence theory of truths. Like, I am, how do I say this? Generally speaking, I am skeptical as to what degree our senses, language, and perceptions correspond to some objective reality. But we don't have anything else to work with. So I think it's ambiguous to what degree we connect to truth in the kind of the absolute sense. I think we can still talk about the world in fairly confident terms using the tools that we have, even if it may not be a one-to-one ratio. Like, for example, we know that we see a table, feels like a solid object, but we know that because of physics that actually much of the table is actually empty space, but we don't perceive that empty space as empty space. And so, yeah, there's definitely a degree to which our brains construct the reality that we perceive, that the reality is, to some extent, always different than how things really are. that's not to say that we can't trust our senses at all. I mean, it's still through our senses that we've discovered this, and through science and observation that we've discovered this is how things are in the first place. So what I would say is that I have a tentative perspective as to what it is we can say is the case and what isn't. Certainly, I don't think there are limitations, and truth being somewhat ambiguous gives credence to any kind of idea. Like, I think science and its limitations is still the best that we have, the best that we got to work with. So I don't think that's a problem. But yes, I think realism is about the way things are, but I don't think you can divorce language from the conversation, because I think language is part of what results in our perception of the way things are. I think language, is key here, especially when talking about morality, because I think people are confused about what the term ought refers to when we're having these kind of conversations. I think oughts are always concerned with goals. And I think when we're talking about what is real, it doesn't make sense to talk about what is real outside of a context of space and time. So this is kind of the ongoing conversation I have with Mike. When he thinks that for something to be real, I have to necessarily frame it in a syllogism, or the reality of what exists should be dependent on a certain kind of linguistic framework. I think it's problematic, because language is already secondary to phenomena, and therefore there's always a gap between the two. And also, I think I gave him this example last time, like, we can use most of what we do is we use induction as far as how we navigate the world, but there's nothing about induction that gives us kind of the knowledge that, almost by definition, like, I don't have certainty or really a justification other than just using induction in that expectation that the sun is going to come out the next morning. But because I have the experience of that always having been the case, it's reasonable to have that expectation. I don't think there is any problem with applying the same kind of perspective with morality. Like, could I imagine a universe where somebody could just do harm and still experience the same kind of well-being? There's no logical contradiction there, but it may just be an existential fact that wouldn't be the case. Like, I think the example I gave him is, Mike, last time we talked, is there any logical contradiction in saying that I could create, what was the thing I said? I could magically make a bridge from a rock. And I tried to put in a syllogism, but I forget exactly what it was now. But I'm trying to remember the specifics. But the point is, something can be sound or still valid, and vice versa. So I don't think that just putting something in a logical syllogism is kind of the only way to approach philosophy, or only way to approach these kind of conversations. Ultimately, things still are what they are, and we can imagine them being otherwise all we want, but our imagination doesn't necessarily translate into what is the case. So I'm not bothered by the fact that somebody could imagine a different morality, like if we just evolved to having a different experience, if that was possible. I don't think it's a defeater for moral realism in the way people think it is. So I hope that clears some of this up. I'm going to try to look at some of the other comments here that were left. One comment was left by, this was particularly for me, by David, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he writes, he quotes me saying, the experience is not reducible to the physical description. And then he says, can't you just accept mind physics dualism? Then all these problems solve themselves. Inner, outer reality. The physical world consists, as far as we understand, of quarks and how quarks work, and can really only be described in terms of quarks and what they do. The category dog does not exist in the physical world. Dog is a mental construct and concept which describes the phenomena that we experience when we sense certain constellations of quarks. In other words, dogs do not exist in this external reality. Dogs don't experience. So no, I don't accept mind-body dualism because I think it's actually incoherent. It results in the well-known mind-body problem. Like, how does something immaterial have an effect and an impact on the material world? Also, what grounds do we have to assume that there's something non-physical to begin with? Now, he used the example of this category of dog. The fact that we have, I don't see any reason that we can't break down this phenomena in physical terms. Yes, the category of dog maybe it doesn't exist. Like, the category is just a description of physical things we observe in the world. Why would that suggest an immaterial reality? Our perception of those objects, then we group as dog, is still a physical one. Whatever is going on in our brains that result in the idea of the dog is still a physical process. And so I don't see where this kind of other substance comes in. I don't see the need to assume an extra ontology there. Dogs, how would I say this? I think still exist in an external reality. Yes, they're a particular constellation of quarks, different than another type of constellation of quarks. And we just have the kind of brains that kind of make these abstractions. But I think that's a linguistic issue. Yes, like category isn't an object floating around in the world somewhere. It's just the way we talk about certain sense data. I don't think that alone is enough to assume some kind of non-physical ontology. I hope this is making sense to you guys. Like I said, if you guys have any questions you want to ask me, feel free. So let's see. I don't know if Pessimistic Ideal is you're still in the audience, but I'm going to read one of your comments here. You write, unfortunately, I found this episode to be a bit disappointing. I don't think Cease ever stated what he meant by material or physical, in contradiction from immaterial and non-physical. Would you be able to state it in a reply? Thank you. Furthermore, I think we need to have a discussion about this because much of what was being said with respect to what non-materialists and non-physicalists hold to was based upon misunderstandings. And I'm actually going to address, at least in part, a blog post that he sent me about this. So what I mean by physical, by material, is basically what exists, what has a physical, what has a spatial and temporal dimension. Now, space and time itself, I think, are just descriptions of what it means for something to exist. So, I think that's fairly simple, right? Like, what takes up space and what exists on a kind of the timeline of reality is what I would say is physical. I don't know, and this is when he was on and the other idealist was on. I have trouble even conceptualizing what people mean by non-physical or by immaterial. Often they'll try to talk about ideas, but I don't see why ideas can't be broken down in physical terms themselves. Yes, an apple and an idea of an apple are not synonymous, but an idea of an apple is still the result of physical phenomena going on in my brain. So it's just a kind of different physical thing that's happening. Where does the immaterial come into play? How would, even if there was such a thing, how would we know it to be the case? And how could we talk about it in a way that was sensible? So I hope that that's making sense so far. I'm gonna read some of this blog posts for you guys, and like I said, feel free to leave any comments in the comment section. Hey Titan, good to see you. Amber, good to see you as well. Thank you everybody that's joining in. I know I started this a little bit late, so we probably won't have that many people, but anyone, any of you guys that come in, I always appreciate you. So this is what he wrote. The materialist, like the idealist, begins with the concrete and the actual, a many felt in one, or experience. However, rather than treating the concrete and actual as a principle of explanation and discovery, the materialist, and he says, from defect of nature or of education, or probably both, is led by an untutored instinct to explain the concrete and the actual, the fact of experience, in terms of the abstract and unreal. So already I'm quite confused by what he's saying here, and I wish that he was still. I don't know if he's still in the audience. Maybe, if not, hopefully he'll leave a reply or he can come back on the show at some point in the future. But I don't know on what grounds does he say that the materialist is talking about experience using the abstract and the unreal. It seems to me that the abstract and the unreal, or the potential, is when the idealist is talking about everything being ultimately mental, or that the material itself is the illusion. I think that it's like they're trying to flip it around. Like we see what we think of mind as being emergent of brains, which are physical things, and yet they want to argue that no, it's mind is at the core of reality, and everything else is secondary. And I don't really understand the justification for this. So he writes, now in explaining experience, the materialist starts off by making two fundamental mistakes, two missteps that are characteristic of all materialistic explanations of experience. Number one, firstly, the materialist fails to recognize two crucial facts that live and move within experience. One is the fact that within experience, the subject of consciousness and the object of consciousness are mutually implicative of each other. And number two, that the non-objectified margin of experience works to shape the object of consciousness. So I don't know what he's saying. Like, and this is kind of the problem that I had when we had the idealist on, is that, and I like pessimistic idealism. Like I don't have anything against him, and I enjoy his feedback, but often I feel like he's using a lot of flowery language without saying things that are very clear. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have a concept behind the words. I think he does, but I think it's important to find a way to kind of communicate this in a way that's more accessible, because I don't know what margin of experience as shaping the object of consciousness refers to. I don't know what he means by the subject and the object are mutually implicative. it may be the case that some of our perception of the object is only based on the fact that we have a mind there. And without our mind there, some of the descriptions that we would give the object would kind of fade away, because ultimately what we're experiencing is a combination of what is out there and our consciousness. So we're not seeing the thing as itself. Like, that's fine if that's what it means. But that doesn't suggest that at the ground level of reality, there is mind. It just means that we don't have access to things as they are. He goes on to say, the fatal consequences here, let me actually address this comment. Begintoner writes, the patterns we discovered in nature do not point to consciousness, either directly or as an emergent phenomenon. How do you anchor consciousness in the physical? So that's an interesting question. I think it's one thing to say, why is it that matter coming together in a certain way produces consciousness, or does it even? There's always the question of why is it the case? Like, even if we did find a self-awareness starts when this particular combination of atoms are set in place, whatever. It still doesn't answer the why question. Why is it not some other thing? But I don't think the question is answerable. You can always ask the why. Why isn't it something else? Why are the laws of physics what they are as opposed to something else? And I don't think that's a question that's answerable in any context. I am not sure that, I do think that consciousness is still, to a large degree, unclear. But I don't think that that's a good reason to assume that it still can't be anchored in the physical when everything else seems to be anchored in the physical. Why would it be that how do I say this? We do know something like this, like something about experience. If you damage the brain, something about our experience is lost, whether it's to recognize faces, the ability to feel certain things, to have empathy, to how we navigate the world can change depending on certain kind of brain damage. Are you suggesting that somehow the brain isn't really itself something that's physical? There is, I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this. I don't know why you would say that the patterns in nature don't point to consciousness. We might not be able to say like why it's the case that consciousness exists yet, but I don't know if that's enough to abandon. So he Begintoner writes, I'm not suggesting anything, just pointing out the facts. I would need to, maybe you can come back on sometime soon and we can have a discussion about that in particular. I'm not sure how you're defining consciousness, and what you mean by patterns we discover in nature do not point to it, and what it is that you're describing in that case as the mental. So if maybe you're holding to this idea of like, even what we mean as brains aren't really like maybe you're saying that the physical itself is the illusion, and I would want to kind of have a clear understanding of that position. Re asks, I tried to show the comment. I think everything is. Can you guys still hear me? Okay. I think my thing froze for a second. Tell me if you guys can still hear me. Am I in two different ways now? Okay, I think it worked. One second. It's weird being on. Okay. Okay, that was weird. Jesus. Okay, sorry about that. That was strange. Oh, what was I saying? Okay, so yeah, you were asking where I get my username from. So cease to know has a kind of a double meaning here. One, it's the name of a song by a musician named Illuvium that I really love. He's an ambient musician. There's a lot of kind of ethereal synthesizer, kind of almost like meditation type music. It's a lot of like drone synth layering of sounds. So that's part of where it's based on. It's also kind of a pointing to the idea that people should be skeptical and kind of humble themselves. And sure, I'll send you a song, absolutely. But people should kind of stray away from their certainties. So cease to know. It's like kind of pointed to that notion that maybe let's not be so hasty in what we claim to know and be a little bit more humble. And so begin to know writes, again, I'm not suggesting or saying anything. I'm just pointing out that the conscious phenomena aren't explained. They are associated with brains in ways that remain mysterious as far as I understand. While I do think that there's a kind of a growing science of the brain and how that all relates. Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not claiming that consciousness is explained. I think there's a lot of mystery that still exists there. I think certain functions of the brain in the way in which it relates to experience, I think neuroscience is making steps forward in that context. But consciousness itself, I agree with you, is still quite a mystery. I don't know that from that observation, it would make sense to think that we should expect the explanation for consciousness to not eventually be found in physical terms. Maybe I'll turn out to be wrong. Maybe it may be an issue of principle. Like, how do we talk about experience when we're having the experience? It may be an issue of principle where we can't make an object out of consciousness in that sense. So it's like driving a car and being able to perceive the car from outside of the car. Like, it may be an issue of principle that we can't do it. I don't know why that should lead people to think, and I'm not saying that you're saying this, but people have used this argument, that therefore it makes more sense to assume that at the core of reality, everything is mental, that the physical is some kind of illusion. So I hope that is making sense. Where was I? Give me 1 second. I'll go back. Okay. But yeah, I'll send you the song. I'll send you in a private message. I don't know if you like it. He has a lot of very strange music, but I like very strange music. So it's kind of the style that I play in. So I play piano, and that's kind of the style that I very much inspired by. So to go on here. What did I say? The fatal consequences of the materialist negligence of these facts will lurk in the background and haunt the entirety of his explanation. Indeed, the materialist uncanny affinity for abstraction and division leads him to treat the subject of consciousness and the object of consciousness as isolated, independent, and externally related units, forgetting that within experience we find the subject of consciousness and object of consciousness to be two abstract, mutually implying determinations of the many felt in one. So again, I think there is a real confusion here as to what he's describing. The fact that the object that I'm having an experience of, so the perception, is itself not independent of my mind, I don't think suggests anything about what is reasonable to assume of ontology. I'm trying to reread this. I don't think the physicalist is saying that the subject of consciousness and the object of consciousness are independent. But he's confusing what is real out there with the perception. I'm saying there is a distinction there. What we perceive is dependent on our brain, is dependent on our experience. Why would that suggest that at the core of reality is experience itself, rather than just being a phenomena that results from brains doing what they're doing? So it may be true that color, for example, as I have the experience of it, is a secondary feature of an object. So if you remove the mind from the equation, much of what we think of as this object ceases to exist. That's not to say that there's nothing about what results in the object that would cease to be. There's still something that we are engaging with through our consciousness that results in the experience and the perceptions that we have. I don't think that therefore it follows that you remove mind and everything else falls away. That doesn't make sense to me. So he goes on to write, furthermore, before anyone even has time to blink, the materialist makes another blunder. He mistakenly identifies experience with either the subject of consciousness, the object of consciousness, or certain sensuous qualitative determinations of the object of consciousness. Well, I think it's his mistake to assume that experience is some other fundamental thing. He says, let us illustrate this miserable mistake with help from a part-whole analogy. I don't know what that means. The materialist mistakenly identifies a whole with one of its isolated parts, said part most evidently being less than the whole of which it constitutes. Again, I don't understand why the need for this kind of language. I mean, I have a background in philosophy, and I'm struggling at following what it is he's trying to say here. Furthermore, the experience is not only richer in content than said isolated part, but also has a unique qualitative three-dimensional structure, subject dimension from a non-perspectival dimension that is non-isomorphic to that of any of its parts taken singly, If you are a materialist and you wish to explain the fact of experience, I only ask you to do justice to experience by actually keeping in mind what experience is. He hasn't said what experience is. I don't know what he means by unique, qualitative, three-dimensional structure. I don't know what any of that is referring to. I am the first one to say that a physical description doesn't encapsulate the experience, because the physical description is secondary to the phenomena. Language is secondary. That doesn't suggest that reality isn't physical. This is what I've said in prior episodes, like Mayor's Room. Like, you can't give a colorblind person a mechanistic explanation of what color is and give them the experience of red. That doesn't follow that, therefore, the experience of red is something non-physical. What it points to is a failure of our language to describe and communicate experience. But language isn't the totality of what is meant by physical. Like, a measurement of something isn't all that is meant by physical. It's one aspect of a larger phenomenon. Like, if I can't see behind a corner and I can't measure that corner because of where I am from my perspective, it doesn't mean that that corner disappears just because I can't measure it. So I don't know if that's making sense to you guys, but I'm struggling with figuring out what it is that he means by these definitions. So he says that the physicalist is making an error in describing what experience is. But I don't know what the idealist is succeeding at. To me, it seems like they're just making an extra assumption, assuming an extra ontology, and making the conversation more complicated. And like I said, I know that he's probably not satisfied with what I'm saying here, because frankly, I'm not actually really addressing what he's saying, because I don't understand what he's saying. And he's welcome to come on and try to explain that to us. I'll read a little more. He says, now it doesn't matter whether the materialist mistakes experience for the subject of consciousness. The object of consciousness, or certain senses, qualitative determinations of the object of consciousness. All three options are ultimately failures, but the materialist doesn't realize this. Indeed, he pushes even farther by performing a biopsy on the object of consciousness. I don't know what biopsy of the object of consciousness means. The materialist, forgetting that the object of consciousness determinate character, is contributed in part by the subject of consciousness. This sentence is going on and on. I don't know. He basically is saying that somehow the process of the materialist, he said, this biopsic operation destroys the datum upon which the materialist was ravaging for answers, leaving him with a contactless, intangible, abstract, hypothetical, and unreal X. I don't know what any of that is referring to. I don't know what is unreal or abstract in the way that the physicalist is describing experience. I'm saying that what exists is that which has a spatial and temporal dimension. Yes, part of that is open to measurement. But even measurement is a language secondary to the phenomena. Like, there's something deeper than that that I don't think suggests anything immaterial. Begintoner writes, the language, by and large, can't explain most of physical reality, which in fact is explained by physical laws in form of equations. Consciousness would need to be amenable to something similar. But wouldn't you say that mathematics is itself a kind of language? Like equations are themselves a kind of language? Now again, this is also brings to my other point. To what degree is mathematics corresponding to reality, I think, is somewhat ambiguous. I think it's incredibly helpful and powerful tool, and I'm not dismissing it by any means. That would be dismissing science as a whole. But yes, I agree with you. I think language, both language and math, I think to some degree don't capture the entire thing. But is that a problem of communication, or is that an issue of ontology? I would say it's a problem of communication. I would hold math to the same kind of issue that I just said language in terms of words has. I think both do a lot to explain physical reality. I just think that it's limited and incomplete. Witter writes, language, like mathematics, is just a shortcut to understand reality. It's an approximation that helps us get as close to the experience as possible. It's just a tool to fill things in. Yeah, I think I would probably agree with that. And maybe math is a better tool than language of words. I'm not convinced by that. I'm not certain. I don't think I'm knowledgeable enough to think one way or another. Begintoner writes, it sounds like you see consciousness as the one physical thing that can remain free of explanation. No, I don't think it can remain free of explanation. I think we would hope that everything that we can talk about has an explanation. I am concerned and skeptical of finding an extensive explanation as a matter of principle, because again, we are having the experience. So to some degree, it seems strange to me that we will be able to talk about the experience while having the experience. It sounds like trying to step out of our own mode of functioning, and I don't know that that's possible. I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying that I'm uncertain as to what to think about it. I think consciousness, is something that we need to certainly understand better as much as we can. I just, like I said, I'm just not convinced that any particular description, mathematical or linguistic, I think in both our languages, but in terms of words, will be enough to capture consciousness, let alone anything else. I'm not saying that consciousness is an exception. I'm saying that all languages fail to capture experience as a whole. Does that mean that experience is, or that the foundation of reality is ultimately non-physical? I don't think that follows. So that's why I think language is such a fundamental aspect of philosophy, because it shapes everything else. Begintoner writes, wait, actually no, there's another. Aglisman ever writes, I'd offer that it's a problem of not having the chemical mechanisms to perceive beyond imagination. I can't taste food by reading the menu. Not a failure of imagination, it's a chemical issue. Yeah, sure. It's if you lack the physical system to have the experience, then nothing is going to give you that experience. But again, what should we believe based on that observation is the issue. Begintoner writes, but that's like expecting the explanation of an apple to produce the apple itself. The explanation is not the thing itself. Why should it be? I'm not saying it is. That's not what I'm saying. Actually, that's exactly the point. I'm saying there is that distance. The explanation is never going to be the thing itself. That's actually exactly it. But why should we think that the explanation is somehow an abstraction pointing to a non-physical ontology rather than just something else that we're doing that's still a physical process? Brains doing what they're doing to express language, to result in sense data. Yes, the idea of an apple is not the apple, but is the idea of an apple itself something that's non-physical, or is it just another physical phenomenon, just a different one? I guess I wouldn't say that the idea of an apple is an object like the apple, but I would still think that it's a physical phenomenon that's taking place. It's always reliant on the physical, as Algorithm ever just said. Strange username, anyway. So, no, I'm not suggesting that the two things should be the same. I'm saying quite the opposite, is that it should be expected and believed that the two are not going to be the same. Therefore, it's not surprising that our languages fail to capture the entirety of what is meant by phenomena. That shouldn't lead people to think that the physical is an illusion. That's my point. I hope that's making sense here. I agree with you there that the two are not the same. But when I read an article or a paper like What It's Like to Be a Bat, that talks about the mechanics of a bat, learning about those mechanics, not giving us the experience of the bat, I agree with everything the paper says until the conclusion, which is, therefore, experience is non-physical. It doesn't follow that that's the case. Our failures to capture phenomena linguistically doesn't suggest much about ontology. It's an issue of epistemology, I think. And it's an issue of a subjective and linguistic limitation that we may not be able to overcome. But I don't think that leads to the conclusions that, for example, pessimistic idealism seems to arrive at, which is that somehow experience is what is fundamental to the whole of reality, and that the physicalist is the one making an error. I want to have him on the show because, unfortunately, I'm reading this blog and I'm just not really understanding what it is that he's describing when he uses this language. Like, I don't know what he means by the concrete and the actual, as opposed to the imaginary. I feel like he flips the two around. So Egglisman ever writes, yes, even a description of the apple or the bat is simply a chemical state in our brains. So it just, I don't know, I think it goes back to it being a limitation of the way in which we can communicate. Wither writes, you cannot understand what it is to be a bat until you're a billionaire orphan in a bat suit. Yes, I love Batman. By the way, are any of you guys excited about the new Batman film coming out? Because I sure am. I think it's going to be great. God, I can't believe it's been going on for an hour already. So yeah, I think that those were, as far as I know, most of the main comments that were left. There's another one. Jay Edits writes, I'm confused, and this was in reference to our video, the Egner clip. Is why are you seeking inductive empirical evidence for the immaterial? when the material can't be measured? Are you expecting it because the video says scientific evidence? No. What I'm saying is that without the methodology of science, anything else, how do we say that any other conclusion isn't imaginary? What's his name? Egner in that clip claims that he's found the feeders for physicalism, but the observations he comes up with, I don't think point to his conclusions. I don't know what Cyrano is. Begin to know writes, what do you expect language? Why do you expect language to explain consciousness? I'm not even saying that. I would hope that in time, science will give us a better understanding. I think just because it hasn't explained it yet, I don't think is good reason to think that it couldn't. But then again, like I said earlier, there may be something peculiar to consciousness, which is you can't have how do you talk about the experience when we are stuck within the experience? It's almost like, I think in principle there's an issue there. It's not that I don't want to explain it, or that I think it's fine that we don't explain it. I'm just concerned with our capacity to explain it, and I'm also concerned with the assumptions that I'm not saying you make, but that a lot of people make, given those observations. But no, I'm not saying that I expect anything. I'm actually, frankly, fairly skeptical to the degree to which language can successfully explain these things. Where it does to a point, never in its entirety. Like this man ever writes, I'm going in with low expectations. This scene isn't good on delivering. I agree with you that a lot of the DC movies have been awful, except the Nolan trilogy I thought was good. But I don't know, with the trailer, it looked really good to me. I agree that a lot of the movies, like the Justice League stuff, was awful. But Begin to know writes, why science gets us past these roadblocks. Science gets us to the non-intuitive, which is the way reality is. Yeah, I agree that science is the best we have, and that it's definitely gets us past many of these roadblocks. But I'm not convinced that it can get us past this roadblock. And I don't think it can get us to any kind of certainty about the way reality actually is. I think it's the best we have, and I think it gets us the closest to such a thing. I mean, I agree with you. It gets us non-intuitive. But I think something like experience is so fundamental that I think it's a little bit different and more problematic than, for example, our intuitions of pure sense data being problematic, or being, like my experience of a table ultimately being incorrect, or if not incorrect, not dealing with what is happening on a more fundamental level. I don't know that consciousness belongs to the same category, because I think consciousness relates to the entirety of the capacity to have experience in the first place. So again, I was saying earlier, like, to me, to talk about consciousness in those terms seems to driving the car while looking outside of the car simultaneously. I don't know that that's possible. I'm not saying that I know it couldn't be done. I'm saying that I have my concerns, and like I said, I want you to come back on, and we can have the conversation. I just think that there is a real problem with communication when it comes to this kind of thing, and I am skeptical and frankly pessimistic about our capacity to overcome that obstacle. and hopefully I'll be pleasantly surprised. I mean, Ray writes, science can get us through a lot. It's usually our species or individual limitations that keeps us from achieving. Yeah, I mean, of course, I'm not knocking down science on any level. I think science is the best we have and the best we're ever going to have. I just think that there are certain philosophical problems, as a matter of principle, that I think are real roadblocks that I don't know can be overcome. If anything can do it, it's science. But like I said, I'm currently pessimistic on that. But I don't have a problem with kind of what bothers me is taking certain real limitations, like the limitations of language and the limitations of our subjective experience, and perhaps the limitations of science, and then concluding that therefore idealism in the context of ontology makes sense, like that everything is mind, or that we don't have all these answers yet, therefore God, like in a theistic context. I don't think a lack of explanation currently should suggest that we should move away from the physicalist perspective. And again, I'm not saying that you were suggesting that, but that is the opinion and the conclusion of a lot of people in philosophy. And especially from the theistic side, that tends to be the path that they take. So I don't know. I think I'll wait for pessimistic idealism to come on again, because I don't want to do him a disservice. I don't know what he's saying in that blog. I don't know how he's defining his terms. So, Begin to writes, most people in science as well think it's all physical. I mean, that's my intuition. If, I don't want to be wrong for a second longer than I have to be. If you can explain to me what you mean by mental and why it is that sort of my perspective is coming from the wrong place. I have my intuition. I struggle to even conceive of what people mean by mental. I just don't understand what is meant by that. But I'm not in principle opposed to anything in the case. Like, I'm open to whatever. It's just that I don't get it. It seems to me that often people kind of assume certain things and use certain words that ultimately I don't think have a lot of content. I don't know. I hope that I've made myself clear, at least on that issue. I'm probably gonna start cooling down soon because I've been going on for an hour already. But yeah, just some news for upcoming episodes. I'm probably gonna do part 2 of the what the hell was his name? Egnor clip. That's whenever Mike comes back. I very badly want to review a bunch of clips from this account where it's 3 different Muslims. They go on and on about criticizing the LGBTQ community and arguments in their favor, talking about what the role of men should be in Islam, what the role of women should be in Islam, and some other very, frankly, disgusting viewpoints. Which is what I find funny. Like, when people get mad at me, they're like, for attacking Islam, and but it's for a good reason. Like, I'm not the one saying that Islam expresses these immoral ideas. It's the Muslims themselves are acknowledging. I'm not saying all Muslims agree with them, but it's certainly far more accepted to have very homophobic and dehumanizing beliefs about the LGBTQ community because of what they think their religion is telling them. So, yeah, I'll get to that hopefully in the next few. Part 2, what do we do to deserve that? Yeah, I mean, if you guys, you give me your feedback. Like, if you're not interested in seeing a part 2 to that video, we don't have to do it. I tend to kind of want to finish what we started. We didn't get to a lot of the video, and there are also other videos on physicalism materialism that I wanted to address. But that guy, the Egner guy, is quite an idiot. So if you guys think that it's better to just avoid that altogether, that's fine with me. Shane the Skeptic called a POS for saying that a man shouldn't treat his mother like his property. What does POS mean? I don't remember what that stands for. Well, being critical is not. I have no problem attacking either. Like, if your belief is that men and women should be held to these social roles that they've made up, yeah, I'm gonna attack that, and I should attack that. Oh, I see. Who called him a piece of shit for saying that you shouldn't treat a mother like your property? I don't who said that. But oh, yes, I see you're back. Yeah. So if you go back, I tried to I read some of what you sent me there. Pessimistic. We'll have to have you back on because, again, this isn't a knock on you. This is maybe just my problem. But I don't know how you're defining your terms in that blog post. Like, you write a lot there, but it's in a way that it's not very clear to me. And I think that, we'll have you back on. We'll get to some of how you're defining these terms. Because you're saying that you feel like we're misinterpreting idealism, but I feel like you're misinterpreting physicalism. And I think we may be just talking past each other. Like you're saying that we are kind of trying to explain the concrete with the abstract, but I think the exact same thing about what you're doing. So one of us is making some fundamental error here. So let's, I'll talk to Jim Mike, and hopefully we can set up something where you can come back. Yeah, I think that would definitely help. Cafe. I've never seen Egner do well in anything. It's amazing to me that you can have some kind of a science background and still think that intelligent design is a reasonable perspective. Certainly on the issue of physicalism, he's severely... there are fair criticisms to make of materialism and physicalism. His are not the ones to use. Muslim guest on TikTok. Yeah, so like I said, there's nothing bigoted about me attacking Islam when the people of the religion that I've encountered are constantly making excuses for homophobia, sexism, slavery, violence, and using their religion as defense of those beliefs. I'm not making this stuff up. I'm reacting to what they're telling me. And I'm not saying all Muslims agree with them. Like, that would be ridiculous. I'm simply referring to the ones that take those interpretations. well, Cafe, like we've said before, whatever experience they might have does nothing to show that it's their assumptions based on that experience isn't imaginary. Like the person taking drugs, yeah, they're having an experience, they're having a different kind of perception, but it doesn't suggest that their perception is real, like in terms of what is actually out there, or that their now experience of reality is the true experience. No, it's just another thing. So, do you guys have any other questions for me? Probably going to look to close this out soon. But like I said, hopefully we can have more videos on a more regular basis, especially now that I'll have my better computer for this. And I'm almost done editing my thesis at this point, so I have a lot more free time in the near future. So if you guys have any last questions, feel free to leave them there. And if not, I'll start. How do you know that your perception now isn't filtering out reality? And when you have a spiritual experience, these filters aren't removed. No, I agree. My perception is filtering our reality. So I don't say that my perception is reality. But I have no reason to think that a spiritual experience isn't just another kind of filter. I'm saying that in either case, it's a filtering. Again, there's no grounds to say that any perspective there or any perception is on high or low or anything. It's just a different framework. Hey, Danny, good to see you. Danny, I think I want to have you on. I know that we exchanged a few emails and then I kind of lost contact with you. Well, I definitely want to bring you on to talk about your interpretation of dualism, because I find that interesting. Wait, what question did I miss? Hold on. I think I missed something. What is your favorite constellation? I don't know much about. I don't know much about that. I'll have to look into it. I'll get back to you on that one. Cafe writes, within a spiritual experience, have you had what William James calls a mystical experience? You're merely speaking out of prejudice if you haven't. No, I'm speaking out on the reality of what can be said in terms of epistemology. I'm not saying that. How would I say this? I'm not saying that a spiritual experience isn't transformative or a positive thing or an interesting thing. I'm saying that it doesn't matter what the content of the experience is from anyone of any perspective, because you still lack the grounds to claim that it's a true filtering out of. To me, it seems like it's just a different filter. Taking drugs and saying something different than what you're used to, even if it's an incredible experience, suggests nothing about what is real out there. It's not an issue of having a prejudice against drugs or prejudice against the notion of a mystical experience. I've had out-of-body experiences. I've had transformative experiences. I've had meditative experiences. Now, I don't know how you personally define spiritual experience. That's part of the problem, I think, here. But it's not that I'm against the idea that we can have very transformative and different experiences. What I'm saying is that suggests nothing of ontology. Well, so you're right. When people have a mystical experience, people will endorse invariably that the experience is more real than waking consciousness. It's the most real experience that they've had. They can say that all they want. That feeling isn't grounds for any kind of knowledge there. I've had dreams that feel more real than my real life. I've had that on a regular basis, actually. Does that mean that when I'm dreaming, I'm going to some other place and having that experience? No. How I feel about something has nothing to do with what is actually real or not real about reality itself. It doesn't matter what they describe it as. I mean, I'm not even arguing against the point. Like, I mean, I don't know how many, I don't have anything to base that off of, but let's say I can accept your statement just for sake of the argument that they describe it as the most real experience. It doesn't mean on any level that it's still a filtering. Like, it's still what they're arriving at through their consciousness. So it's always going to be removed from the way things actually are. And even if it wasn't, we wouldn't know that it wasn't. This is a matter of principle. So the epistemic issue, the gap there between our experience and what we can say about reality remains the same as a matter of principle, regardless of how real or fake the experience feels. That's just a matter of epistemology. It's not a matter of being against any particular perspective. It's just, it is what it is. We would have no way of knowing what filter was closer to reality than what wasn't. Just saying it feels more real doesn't make it more real. Yeah, and again, so Cafe writes, the professionals of Johns Hopkins recognize mystical states of consciousness as universal, as a phenomenon which has been occurring for millennia. I'm not denying that these states are real as far as can be experienced on a universal level. I have no problem with that. What I'm saying is that points to nothing about what is real in terms of reality itself. It just points to these are experiences that people can have. These are a kind of framework in which people can find themselves in. And they may be extremely powerful and shared universally. I agree with you that it's a shared thing among religions and even among atheists, I think, can have these transformative experiences. But again, we're still talking about perception. We're still talking about a kind of filter. I don't think you have any grounds to claim that now I do enough drugs and now I know that the filter to have been removed and now what I'm experiencing to be the real thing. Feeling it's real is not an argument. So I think I would leave it at that. As far as everything else, yeah, I don't know much about constellations. I mean, I love stargazing, but I don't know a lot about what is what. So, last call for questions. And again, thank you all for joining me tonight. Begin to writes, my daughter is named after a constellation in the southern hemisphere. The sky there is more beautiful because one is looking into the center of the galaxy, unlike in the northern hemisphere. That's beautiful. Yeah, that's awesome. That's sweet. But yeah. So, what's my favorite color? I think purple. It used to be blue for a long time, but I think I moved to purple. Is black a color or a lack of color? I don't know how that's defined there. But yeah, purple, green, light purple. Cafe, again, I'm not dismissing mystical experiences because I think I've had some, maybe not to the degree of, like mystics necessarily. I'm not dismissing the experience. I'm recognizing that there is a gap between the experience, which I can value as being transformative and beautiful, and what we can say about ontology based on the experience. I'm not dismissing it. I'm recognizing the real philosophical gap there. So, yes, I definitely need some rest. So, thanks again for everyone who joined tonight. And hopefully we'll be back sooner rather than later. hoping either tomorrow or the following day. I'm trying to get more content on a regular basis. It's just a little hard with school and everything. But thank you everyone for your continued support and for joining us and supporting. If you want to support us more, Axioms on Trial, like and subscribe. Patreon.com/Axioms on Trial is our Patreon page. We're still working up to actually navigating Patreon, taking us longer than I expected. So bear with us. I'm now also on TikTok under the username Cease to Know. And if you want to be on the show, email us at axiomsontrial@gmail.com. And yeah, thank you everybody, as always. So I will see you guys again very soon. Take care.